Uh, Welcome to our third and final installment of the Living a Jewish Life program of our Back to the Basics theme this year. The previous Living a Jewish Life classes were on Shabbat and on Kashrut, and tonight we are going to do the topic of Tzedakah. As with the previous times, feel free to interrupt, ask questions, to bring your curiosity to the table. And I tried to prepare in a way which would allow for some conversation and discussion. So it may be that we do a portion where we go into breakout rooms. If that works, great. If not, we'll stay in one group and we'll see how it goes. All right. So, like last week, I prepared a slideshow. Just trying to up my technical game here. And let's see. This is the slideshow. Now we want to hit show from the beginning. All right. So here we are. And the topic is tzedakah. All right. We're going to start with some role plays because everybody loves role plays. You are the director of an urban homeless shelter. Or if you don't want to be in your mind, if you don't want to be the director of the homeless shelter, you could be on the board of the homeless shelter. How would you react or respond or resolve the following situations? So here's the first one. Director of an urban homeless shelter, scenario 1. You are speaking to a group of kids in a school. One of the kids asks, when I go into the city and we see homeless people on the subway, one of my parents always gives them money, and my other parent never gives money to any of them. What do you recommend that people do in this situation? How do you answer? Now, don't just answer. I want you to think about it for a moment. You're the director of a homeless shelter. So you're an expert on urban poverty and the need for giving. You're talking to a bunch of middle schoolers, and you get this question. What do you say? Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to divide us into 4 rooms, and just join your room and discuss what you would say in your room. We'll come back hopefully in about 3 minutes or 2 minutes. Okay.
I would.
联合性的人权 breakout.
We're in 4. Breakout room 4. You have to join it.
What are you doing here for? It's I don't.
Go back.
We got
everybody.
And they gave the food, the leftovers to the person.
Welcome back.
hello.
All right. So would somebody like to share one comment from the conversation?
Kathy, go
Go ahead,
ahead.
Henry.
Yeah, the first comment was we hate doing that.
Thank you, Henry.
We actually had good conversations back and forth with Mark and Barry about
Oh, that was Mark and Barry.
about the differences even between the two of us and what we would do. And I was always told, don't give a person money, but we came to other discussion. We had other discussions like if the child or the student or however age this person is can say to the person, well, there's a machine here, can I get you something to eat? Or send them or give them information about where to get help or something like that.
Okay.
Cover the bases.
Other thoughts?
Go ahead.
The number one thing is, I would tell, if I was the director, I would never be hired as the executive director of a
Kathy?
hotel.
She was fired.
I would tell, I think the most important thing is to get the message across. The person is a human being, and at least make eye contact with them. At least look at them and recognize them as a
If I
person.
can.
All right. Even if you're not going to give money, you should still smile at them. Yeah. Okay. Murray.
No, Kathy.
Well, actually, Kathy, I represented our group, so if
Okay.
you don't mind.
All right. Kathy.
Oh, okay. I was sharing a story that I think maybe it was Mishka in an earlier session that we had, one of our teaching times, that we had a rabbi at Agudat Achim whose model I like to follow. And he had said he carries a certain amount of single dollar bills or money in his wallet each day, so that he knows if someone approaches him needing money, asking for money, he gives that amount, and when it's done, it's done. And that way he hasn't impoverished himself, but he hasn't ignored the mitzvah either. And then Murray was talking about how he does not feel the same way if someone reeks of alcohol or tobacco smoke or that. And I'm trying to think, wait, I lost my train of thought.
Instead, offer food.
Yeah, to see if instead we could, can I give you a sandwich? Can I give you some food?
Mhm.
But not just handing over money to that person.
Which feels like it preserves the person's ability to choose more? Giving a dollar bill or giving a granola bar?
$1 bill.
I still prefer to
I think give them a card of where to go.
the dollar bill.
Mhm.
And I
I
prefer
mean,
giving them the card. Here's where to go.
Right. So if you're the executive director of a homeless shelter, it does seem like sort of the obvious thing to say to the kid is, well, your parents should give them their money to our homeless shelter because we're serving that population. Right.
Right.
I mean, that feels
Well,
it feels like a gimme.
I shared this story that actually happened to me. We were visiting our son Sam in New York City, and we were in Soho, and we were walking towards a restaurant for what I knew was going to be an expensive dinner. And here's this man on the street asking for money. And so I went to give him money, and this other woman came running up to me saying, "Don't give him money, don't give him money. He's a sex abuser, he's a child molester, he's not, So how do you know? How do you know who it's very difficult.
Do you think that a person who is has an uncomfortable history, maybe of addiction or crime or whatever is less human and less worthy of your charity?
Well, I didn't, because I was wanting to, if someone is that desperate that they're on the street asking for money, I prefer to give something and let it be.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let's go to the next scenario.
Our group didn't get heard.
Okay. Okay. I was just planning to take one or two comments. I think part of what's really great about the breakout rooms is everybody gets to speak in the group.
Can I just say a couple of things, though? One of the first things I would do is I would thank the kids who ask the questions. I would acknowledge that that's a really good thing that these kids are doing. How it was presented to them to begin with, I can't say. But that's the kind of thinking that needs to be reinforced in kids. So
Sure.
that would be the first thing, especially as the executive director. I would want to say that, because you'd have some clout as such. We did balance the question, and I shared the story that Kathy did give me credit for, but between giving to the individual and giving to the organization that is their shelter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's
trying to balance those, or talking about them all.
All right. You want to be as supportive as possible to help people at your shelter get jobs so they won't need so that they can get their own apartments and they won't need to stay at the shelter anymore. What kinds of activities and programs might you try to run at the shelter in the afternoons and evenings to help people get jobs? No.
Well, we know we have a good example with City Mission.
Right.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about this one, but I think it's an important one to think about, right? I think Sadaka.
City Mission has a program where they try to help people to get skills and get jobs.
Right.
And housing.
Among other things they do.
And housing. Our local City Mission is actually right now creating an apartment building for that.
Well, they have a
purpose.
couple of them already.
Yeah, but they're in the process
This
of
is
making
a new
another
one.
Yeah.
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 Well, and workshops to help them have interview skills and bathing skills and how you show up for an interview.
Mm-hmm.
Work with
and clothing and the right interview
clothing.
suits to show
Right,
up for an
interview suits.
interview.
right.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
And fortunately,
All right.
City Mission tries to do all of those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. My neighbor who works for the City Mission as a volunteer had the director of the mission come and do a talk as we sat out on her lawn. And one of the things he talked about was the clothing. And he read some letters that some of the recipients of clothing that came, how it made a difference that he was wearing a tie.
All right. I'm honored that you guys liked this question so much that even though I said let's not discuss it, we're discussing it.
We overrode you.
We have
The
to be blessed with one of the most fantastic people whose director is Mike Sakoshes.
Yeah.
Is an amazing individual.
He's amazing. He could sell coals to Newcastle. He's amazing.
All right, so here's the third one. You want to put an inspirational biblical quote on the door of the shelter. Which of these quotes is the best? And why does that quote resonate? So, from Deuteronomy, open your hand to your needy brother, lending him sufficient for his needs. From Psalm 102, God listens to the prayer of the poor. God will not reject their supplication. Also from Deuteronomy, may you be blessed in your coming in, and may you be blessed in your going out. Just think. Don't react. Which of these quotes would you put if you were getting to choose what would go on the door of your shelter? Which one of these?
The first.
Don't say anything.
Okay.
I wanted to raise my hand.
Just think.
I agree with you.
I'm supposed to say.
All right. Is there anybody who hasn't spoken yet who would like to speak? Yeah, okay. Deborah?
I definitely think the third one.
Me
I
too.
think the first one, you
Yes.
are calling attention to the fact that they may be needy, they may need they're coming for help, and you're like putting in their face that I'm a needy person. I think God listens to the prayer of the poor and that's all you have to do is pray. But I think on the third, you want to say you're blessed for coming in, and may you be blessed on going out, and let's hope for happy endings, and you're a person, and let's make it work. It's the only one that's truly positive and leaves room for self-reflection and self-assertion.
All right. Gary, you have a response?
I as always agree with Deborah.
I'm sorry to hear, Gary. I meant Gary Reich, but thank you.
Better agree too.
Maybe Deborah already said that. I would have chosen the third one also because it says, in effect, you're welcome here, but there's something out there also.
Nice.
And this is not the final destination.
Mm-hmm. Did anybody, just by a show of hands, did anybody gravitate more toward the first or second quote? Rob, Fox, which one did you like?
I like the first one. I think we're all responsible for each other. And, I think that's the heart of this quote. So
Even if you're walking in this door because you need something, even you can also give to your needy brother. Eileen, I saw your hand also.
I actually initially chose the first one because I thought it said more. I thought it was, there was dignity to it. So I felt that, your needy brother. But then as with Gary, once Deborah spoke, I was definitely on board with the third one. When Jeff said it, I was like, no, I definitely like one. When Deborah said it, I'm like, oh yeah, she's totally right.
So the messenger counts.
I always agree with Deborah.
That's why Deborah works at Federation.
All right, great. We're going to move on. Okay. So we have an obligation to do our best to move forward, to take one step forward. Poverty is an overwhelming need. And so it's important when we're thinking about this to keep in mind the sage wisdom of Rabbi Tarfon, who said, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, it's not upon you to complete the work, but you are not free to refrain from trying. You can't give up on it. So
and
even
along the way,
yep.
Along the way, it also said what percentage of your income you should give, or not go beyond.
We're going to get to that. We are. Yeah. So okay. I think it's important to say, yep, you've got to help, right? Poverty is something that you can't ignore. All right. The beginnings, the origins of tzedakah, like many of our mitzvot, come from the Torah. And in the Torah, we learn these three categories of tithing, and this is called peah, leket, shicha, and peah. So leket is being able to if while you're cutting your field, any of the produce falls on the ground, that you're not allowed to bend down and pick that up. That you have to leave for the poor. And in ancient Israel, the poor would follow along behind the threshers in the field and would pick up what was left. Okay.
The corners of the field also, Rabbi.
Yes. Shichacha is the sheaves, which that's like wheat which has already been bundled up. But if you loaded all of the sheaves onto the donkey and brought them in, and then you went back for a second load, and you went back for a third load, and then you thought you were done, but you missed a couple, those you can't ever go back for. Those are left for the poor. And peah is the corners of the field. Now, what is the corner of a field? Right? The Mishnah says there is a list of things which have no measure or which can't be measured. And the corner of your field is one of these things. That is to say, a person with one really, really big field might choose a corner that's a much bigger corner than a person who has a small field might choose a small corner. That is to say, what percentage of your field is the corner? There is no set amount, right? It could be 1% of your field. It could be 10% of your field. It could be 20% of your field. You know, if each corner is 5% of your field, that's a 20% contribution to the poor. Right? There's no rule about how big or how little the corner has to be in the Torah. So that's the origins of tzedakah. Then I have a text here that says, the severity of the obligation. There is a biblical transgression in ignoring a poor person, because it is possible that it will come to bloodshed, that the poor person will die if one does not give to him immediately. And that's based on Devarim, where it says, if there be among you anyone who in need within your gates, thou shalt not harden your heart, nor shut thy hand from thy needy brother, but thou shalt surely open thy hand unto him, and shalt surely lend him sufficient for whatever he needs. Right? This is the idea that you should give to everyone who asks. Right? Don't harden your heart against someone. All right. And who are you to say whether that person is spending your money correctly or not? It is possible that that person would die without your contribution.
So is that saying that we should be giving to the homeless person on the street?
I definitely think that there's voices in our tradition that say that, yes, including this one from Deuteronomy. Don't harden your heart. Don't think to yourself, oh, that guy is probably just going to go buy booze with it. That is a way of hardening your heart. That's a way of saying, yeah, I don't need to give to this needy individual. Now, I do not think, right, I think that when we think about how to give, right, giving to organizations that is doing good work is a much more effective way of making your dollars go farther. All right, so that is also part of our Jewish tradition. You want to give effectively, but you also don't want to feel like you're hardening your heart against a needy person. All right, here's a quote from the Talmud Bavli. Rav Yehuda says, charity distributors examine the level of poverty of one who asks for clothing, but they do not examine the level of poverty of one who asks for food. So how much checking up do we have to do on people who come to ask for communal support? The Talmud says, if they come asking for communal support for food, we don't do any checking up. If they come asking for communal support for clothing, we do a little checking up. So
Is
that's,
asking for
yeah.
Is asking for money equivalent to asking for food?
That's a great question. So I think no, right? I think that, and I also think yes. Right? In today's society, seldom do we have people who knock on doors asking for food. Most of the time that people are asking for help, they're asking for money so that they can buy food. Right? Now, we do have soup kitchens. So basically, right, this is like the case of a soup kitchen. Person comes into the soup kitchen and asks for a bowl of soup, right? You don't check to see whether they really need that bowl of soup. You just give it to them. That's what this is saying. We do a little bit more rigorous checking if they're asking for a different kind of assistance. But, right, that doesn't mean we won't give to that person. It just means, right, the community has a responsibility to make sure that the communal charity fund is being distributed correctly and not used inappropriately. And so we do have a requirement of a certain amount of checking up. All right. I realize that I'm doing all the reading, but actually I usually call on people to read the quotes. So I'm going to start doing that. Anita, do you want to read this one?
Yes, Talmud Bavli Bava Batra 9a. If a poor person was going door to door asking for charity, one is not required to attend to him and give him a large gift, since he is already collecting money as he goes door to door. But one does attend to him and give him a small gift.
All right, so this I think goes directly to the question of the person on the subway, which is you don't have to give that person $20. You don't have to give that person $200. You don't have to give that person $2,000. You don't have to give them a large gift, but you should give them something. Because that's part of what it means to attend to him as a person.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Wait, you're on.
In doing so, also, though, you're setting an example for anybody else who might not give at all.
Yeah, that's true. Barry, do you want to read the next one?
Ravasi says, Tzedakah is equivalent to all the other mitzvot combined.
Yeah, so the rabbis say this about a lot of different mitzvot. Torah study is also
they have their own favorite mitzvah.
This is the most important.
This is the most important one.
Tell us the ones we have to do that encompass then all the others.
Yeah, Torah study, because Torah study leads to all of them. Sadaka, because you're transforming the world and making it possible, right? The idea of tzedakah is you're even making it possible for people to continue living and do more mitzvot, right? The person that you supported through tzedakah goes on to do many, many, many mitzvot. So, right, same with educating your children, same with education, right? Jewish education is also one of these. So, yeah, but, right?
Pick your poison.
It's very interesting to think about the way in which tzedakah helps to pay it forward, so to speak. It's not just the one act of tzedakah, but it keeps going. All right. We couldn't do a session on tzedakah without spending some time on Maimonides' levels of tzedakah, which we're going to read like in Maimonides' own words, and then, well, I guess in Maimonides' own words in translation, and then we're going to read a summary of it also, which I think gets it so that we can see them all on one slide. Let's see, Andy, do you want to read the first one?
Sure. Maimonides' 8 levels of tzedakah. Mishnah Torah gifts to the poor. 10. There are 8 levels of tzedakah, each one greater than the other. The greatest level, higher than all the rest, is to fortify a fellow Jew and give him a gift, a loan, form with him a partnership, or find work for him until he is strong enough so that he does not need to ask others for sustenance. Of this it is said in Leviticus, if your kinsman being in straits comes under your authority and you hold him as though a resident alien, let him live by your side. That is, as if to say, hold him up so that he will not fall and be in need. As see the Babylonian Talmud on Shabbat.
Yeah. So the greatest, the most important thing that we can do to end poverty is not to feed a person, because that only fixes the immediate problem. The thing that we should be doing is working on the systemic sources of poverty in the first place, right? Find people jobs, get them good educations, have them in sustainable housing and affordable housing, right? All of the other ways of lifting people up that help to get at the root causes of poverty and hunger are the best ways of giving tzedakah. And so if you have an opportunity to give someone a job and keep them out of the poorhouse, right? That is Maimonides' greatest form of tzedakah. All right. Mishka.
One level lower than this is one who gives tzedakah to the poor and does not know to whom he gives, and the poor person does not know from whom he receives. Shall I continue on this?
Yeah, you can read that.
Maimonides holds the anonymity of both giver and receiver of great importance, but he does not require anonymity at the highest level of giving. This is perhaps because the highest level of giving addresses the source of poverty, whereas giving something to a beggar only alleviates a person's temporary need.
Right, I sort of already said that. But all right, so how do you give tzedakah in a way where you don't know who you're giving it to and they don't know who gave the money? We have a system for that in our community. It's through institutional charitable giving. For example, in our own synagogue, you can make a donation to the Rabbi's Discretionary Fund. Rabbi's Discretionary Fund makes donations to people in our community who need to pay for fuel for their house, or an extra set of groceries for the month, or boots for somebody who needs boots, right? And you don't know who is getting the boots, and they don't know who made the donation to the Rabbi's Discretionary Fund, and the only person who knows the giver and the receiver is the rabbi, and the rabbi doesn't talk about it.
Sounds like a commercial message there.
Not only is it a commercial message, but right, we are in a winter that is harder than many winters we have had in the past, and we have people in the community that have needs that are greater and different than the needs that they've had in the past. And this is one way that we support the community, is through that mechanism. There are lots of institutional giving things. The Rabbi's Discretionary Fund just happens to be the one that's the most immediately connected to Agudat Achim. But right, you can donate to JFS, to the Federation, to emergency funds, to SICM, right? All of those organizations in our area are also doing that work, and doing it in a way where at least the person who's receiving the money doesn't know the exact individual that the money came from. Although, right, one of the nice things about giving through the synagogue's discretion, the rabbi's discretionary fund, is that it really is very, very anonymous, right? There is no public announcement of who made donations to the rabbi's discretionary fund, right? Make a donation to the synagogue, that can be announced sometimes publicly, right? You've got to make you can make anonymous donations other places, no question about it. But the system of the rabbi's discretionary fund is very anonymous. Deborah.
The Shalom Food Pantry is another place. They've actually been doing food pickup dates with baskets of food prepared. People come, they're using the JCC in Albany's parking lot, pick up the food for people who need. I don't think there are questions asked. It's for people who
and their deliveries for those who can't pick
for
them up.
those who can't go out shopping. Through both JFS and Shalom Food Pantry locally, beyond our synagogue Jewish community, are doing things.
Yeah, and it's important, and especially this year, it is. People are hurting.
Yeah.
Great. All right. The next one. I sort of lost track of what order I was going.
This is number 2, 3 rather, if you're going.
Yeah, no, I meant of who was. Mark, have you read?
Not yet. One level lower is one who gives tzedakah, and the giver knows to whom he gives, but the poor person does not know from whom he takes. Such did the great sages who would go in secret and throw money onto the doorways of the poor.
Right. Right. The danger here is that the rich who know might then act differently around the person that they're benefacting, with that, like unconsciously, with, you know, but that, right, like that's why the double anonymity is better than this. But this is better than the next one, says Maimonides, which is that Marcia, do you want to read?
One level lower is when the poor person knows from whom he takes, but the giver does not. But the giver does not know to whom he gives. Such was the way of the sages, who would tie coins to their garments and would throw.
Sorry.
The last one.
Who would throw the bundle over their shoulders so the poor could not come up behind them and take them without being embarrassed.
Right. So the difficulty here is that it might cause a sense of indebtedness, that the poor person knows who paid for whatever, and they might then feel beholden. All right, thoughts about Maimonides' 8 levels so far? Oh, okay, so we'll keep going.
I guess it's interesting because even the lowest level is, I would think, is good, and it's just a ranking, and I think it's a good dichotomy for thinking about, you know, how to give. But all levels of giving, I assume, are good.
Yes. Well, better to give, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And right, and the example that he gives is of sages, right? These are learned people, right? People that the community would look up to, and this is how they did it. So that, right, I think the reason why he gives those examples in particular is to emphasize that point that you just made, that it's good. All right. The next 4 are all on one sheet. Murray, do you want to read them?
One level lower is to give to him with one's own hand before he can ask. One level lower is to give to him after he has asked. One level lower is to give him less than one should, but with kindness. One level lower is to give to him begrudgingly.
Yeah. So Maimonides points out that attitude does matter in this, especially if you're doing a face-to-face giving, which part of the reason I think why the anonymous giving is better in some ways is it takes out the emotion a little bit, right? Like if the rabbi comes to the wealthy person in town and says, look, I need you to give a little more to the rabbi's discretionary fund this winter than you have in past winters, that person might feel a little begrudging about it, but no one will know, right? No one will know.
That's a mix of those.
It reminds me of my solicitation days.
Yeah.
I
All right,
wonder
so-
what Maimonides would think of those that give for the sole purpose of recognition that they've given.
Yes. There's that in my nonprofit management class in rabbinical school, we talked a lot about that because whatever Maimonides thought about anonymous giving, like people like to have their name associated with their gift, and when your name is associated with a gift, it can often inspire other gifts in a way that an anonymous gift doesn't do. And I think there's something to that. I worry about this, right? Occasionally, the rabbi's discretionary fund supports a communal need, a communal institution, like, say, Federation. And I try very hard to make sure that if the rabbi's discretionary fund is doing that kind of a donation to Federation, that it doesn't get confused with my personal donation. That shouldn't come from Rabbi Spitzer. It comes from the Rabbi's Discretionary Fund. That's a Tzedakah organization. On the other hand, like, it is good for the community to know that Congregation Agudat Achim supports Federation in that kind of way, or that Congregation Agudat Achim, right? And one of the things that the Rabbi's Discretionary Fund is supposed to do as a charity fund is to support the communal institutions. So it's good that people know that came from there, right? So there's a tension there. How do and the things that, you don't want to be able to like feel like you tracked your exact donation, like, oh, I made a $180 donation to the Rabbi's Discretionary Fund, and the rabbi made an $180 donation to the JCC's fundraiser. That was my money, right? You don't want to be thinking about it like that. So I as the person who administers that tzedakah fund, I do a lot of thinking about it. Now, I will share with you a personal anecdote, which is I got into rabbinical school, and between when I got in and when I started, the rabbi who was my rabbi that I grew up with and who wrote my recommendation to rabbinical school and who signed my ketubah was implicated in a scandal involving embezzlement of community funds, including the Rabbi's Discretionary Fund. And I think, right, that I spend more time thinking about this than the average rabbi does. I went to the board and said, I refuse to use the Rabbi's Discretionary Fund to send myself to like a dinner, a communal tzedakah dinner gala, right? Which other rabbis have used the discretionary fund for that, and which probably there's no ethical problem with it. But I was like, but if I'm personally getting something out of this, I feel uncomfortable using it for that. I was like, I said to the board, I said, it's okay with me if you think I should be at that for you to pay for my seat at it using communal funds from the synagogue. That's okay with me. But the rabbi's discretionary funds there should not be any hint of any impropriety that something is coming for me through that fund. And I think the reason why I feel so strongly about it is what relates to this personal experience that I had with my teacher. And the board was split about that. They were like, well, rabbis have always used it for that, so you can also use it for that. And I don't think I realized that I was feeling so strongly about it because of my rabbi until later. Like I don't think I presented it that way to them. I think I only realized that it was probably some kind of post-traumatic response. Anyway, so I take very seriously the trust that the community has invested in me as the administrator of that particular charitable fund, and I try very hard to administer it in an above board and ethical way, which includes the occasional audit, which I think is very important. All right.
That's right.
Just out of curiosity,
we can
how
all
many
sleep
millions
easier
are in
tonight.
that fund?
What?
We can
How
all
many
sleep
millions of
easier
dollars
tonight.
are in that fund?
All right, one at a time. Gary?
How many millions of dollars are in that fund?
Oh yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, right. Yeah. People make $36 donations. There's not a lot of money in the fund, but it is still communal money. That's important. Somebody else also was talking. Was it Mark?
Yeah, I just said we can all sleep easier tonight.
Oh yeah.
It's still a commercial message.
An important commercial message.
Yes, no argument.
All right. We now have several texts with the title "To Whom to Give." Molly, do you want to read?
Sure. Bava Metzia 71a. Rav Yosef taught, the verse states, if you lend money to any of my people, even to the poor person who is with you, Exodus. The term my people teaches that if one of my people, like a Jew and a Gentile, both come to borrow money from you, my people take precedence. The term the poor person teaches that if a poor person and a rich person come to borrow money, the poor person takes precedence. And from the term who is with you, it is derived, if your poor person, meaning one of your relatives and one of the poor of your city, come to borrow money, your poor person takes precedence. If it is between one of the poor of your city and one of the poor of another city, the one of the poor of your city takes precedence.
Right. So this text starts to deal with the issue of, okay, there are a lot of poor people in the world. How do we choose where to allocate our funds? All right. Here's another text. Let's see. Deborah.
To whom to give? One sustains poor Gentiles along with poor Jews, and one visits sick Gentiles along with sick Jews, and one buries dead Gentiles along with dead Jews. All this is done on account of the ways of peace, to foster peaceful relations between Jews and Gentiles.
Right. Maybe we would prefer that it said, all this is done because Gentiles are also human beings.
In
right?
the image of God.
Yes.
Yeah.
It doesn't say that, though we know from our understanding of Jewish values that Judaism also believes that, right? But here, the reason given is mipnei darchei shalom, right? So on account of the ways of peace. In other words, right, because it's important that we're not seen as being too insular, Jewish people. There are many hospitals named after Jewish people, public hospitals, right? Hospitals that support everybody. There are libraries named after Jewish people, and museums named after Jewish people, and universities with large Jewish donors. And all of that is a part of, right, this idea that, we're not just supporting the Jewish community. But who is supporting the Jewish community other than the Jewish community? But anyway, I wanted to give both of these texts because we have the text that says, the Jewish poor takes precedence over the non-Jewish poor, and the poor of your family takes precedence over the poor of someone else's family, and the poor of your city takes precedence over some other city. And that's one voice. And then we have this voice that says, we support Jews and non-Jews. We visit Jewish and non-Jewish sick. We if there's a person that needs a burial loan, we make sure to pay for the burial of Jews and non-Jews. Deborah or Gary.
I'm seeing two questions. Is the differentiation between a loan and a gift? And the other question is, what is Gittin 61a? Where is that from?
That's the Talmud. The Talmud Bavli Masechet, the tractate that deals with divorce law. So anyway,
And loan versus a gift?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we definitely differentiate between those two things. And the Torah does and doesn't, right? The Mishnah does, right? The rabbinic tradition does clearly differentiate between a loan and a gift. The Torah doesn't, because in the Torah's conception of economics, right, a gift was always, in a certain sense, a loan, because oftentimes people repaid that gift through labor. By the time of the Second Temple period, right, there was by that time there was a communal Tzedakah fund that already operated out of the temple. But in Leviticus, when it's talking, it's not clear whether it's it's embedded in laws that have to do with sort of economic indentured slavery, like you would work to pay off your loan. Which, by the way, goes back to the Talmud's, to Rambam's thing of, okay, give somebody a job. Like there is something sort of justice-y about that. Gary Reich.
I just wonder if it isn't worth highlighting in this context the recent hospitalization of Saib Erekat in Jerusalem. And I think it's the case, although I could be wrong, that on a previous occasion he received a lung transplant in Jerusalem, which caused some Israelis to tear up their organ donor cards.
He died. He died of COVID.
He did die recently, yes.
Yeah. It's an interesting point, right? How much are we responsible for providing for the needs of our sick adversaries? Mishka.
A couple of things. This one, when we were just talking about the difference between a loan and gift, there's the problem with that in part is the Shemitah year, when loans have to be repaid or don't get repaid. And the question of forgiving a loan becomes a problem, especially as the years get closer to that. And, you know, my understanding is by year 5, people are not giving loans, so that the rabbinate developed some sort of legal fiction that the loan would be repaid to them, and then they would kind of pay it off so that everybody ultimately would be satisfied. I'm not sure I have that entirely clear, but that the Shemitah is a big, can be or had been seen as a big problem with regard to loans or gifts. Another thing I wanted to say, I had worked a gazillion years ago with the wife of the fellow who was the head of the JCC in Albany. And she made it very clear one day, we were talking, she said, everybody gives to the Cancer Society, but only Jews give to Jewish organizations. You can give to the Cancer Society as well, she would say, but first make your contributions in the Jewish community. And then the third thing I wanted to say is a lot of the hospitals, especially in the bigger cities, have names like Mount Sinai or Beth Israel, because there was a time when Jews were not allowed into other private hospitals. So those Jews who had the money established these particular hospitals. It's different now, but we're talking about the turn of the last century, late 1800s.
Yeah, I can't say that I know the history of that well.
That was the case in New York City, for sure.
Yeah. All right. Supporting oneself takes precedence over everyone, right? You shouldn't give tzedakah if you're going to impoverish yourself to do it. You can only give tzedakah once you've covered your own sustenance. Afterward, you prioritize the support of your own parents, right? And that counts, according to this teaching, as tzedakah, right? That is, it's support of somebody in the community that isn't yourself. That is, in a certain sense, right? If you don't support them, then they might be on the public dole, right? They're going to take money from the communal institution. So your spending on your parents' upkeep and support counts as tzedakah, because it's it's keeping them off the community's support systems. Of course, if your parents are independently wealthy, so much the better. And they take precedence over supporting your own children, because your children presumably have the potential to be earners in a more sustainable way. This is not talking about young children. This is your adult children. And then afterward, your children, and they take precedence over your siblings. And then your siblings take precedence over other relatives, and relatives to neighbors, and neighbors to the city, your city to people of other cities. All right. If a lot of people come knocking at your door asking for some money, and there's not enough money to provide for, clothe, or redeem all of them, which there never is, the Kohen takes precedence over the Levi, and the Levi takes precedence over the Israelite. But this is only when they're equal in wisdom. If there's a sage, no matter his background, you want to redeem the sage and support the sage over the uneducated, because you're also then not just supporting a poor person, but you're also supporting Jewish education, so that more people will be exposed to the great teachings of that sage. Also, you'll note that it was the Jewish sages that wrote this law. All right. The rabbis taught male and female orphans who come to be supported. We support the female orphan first, and then the male orphan, because the male orphan could go from door to door with more safety in their physical person than a woman, than a female orphan, right? So this is right? We acknowledge the social privilege of the various people who are coming for us. And if we think that it's more likely that somebody will be able to get supported in a different kind of way than from the communal tzedakah fund, we want to help them to get access to that resource and save the communal tzedakah fund for people who don't have any other option. Male and female orphans who come for support for their dowry, we marry off the female orphans first and then the male orphans, because the embarrassment of an unmarried woman is greater than the embarrassment of an unmarried man. Or maybe it means the embarrassment of a woman marrying with no dowry is greater than the embarrassment of a man marrying without money to go into the marriage. So, right, this is a law which is from the Babylonian Talmud. It's a 2,000-year-old law, but it speaks to this, I think, still today relevant category of sort of understanding the social position of the people who are coming asking for help. All right. Now we're up to how to give. The Bach, who is 16th century, Rabbi Yoel ben Shmuel Sirkis, said, one who has 100 coins to give to the poor, his reward is greater when he divides them among 100 poor people, rather than giving all 100 gold coins to 1, 2, or 3 poor people, because one who gives to 100 poor people sustained 100 lives. This is not how we generally think about charitable giving nowadays. But so you can see, right, they were dealing with this same question. Is it better to give to 100 different people $1 or to one person $100? It's a complicated question, right? Like there's all kinds of different emotional resonances to this. And so, right, I think both are valuable. I will say this, if it's a choice between giving $100 on one day or $1 for 100 days, I think the $1 for 100 days is more powerful for your day-to-day life than the $100 once. Because if you are giving $100, if you're giving $1 every day, like for example, you come to Shacharit every morning and you put $1 in the pushka in the back at Shacharit, which is very common custom for people who come to Shacharit in person, which is nobody anymore, but okay. But that was very common, right? It trains you to give regularly and to give every day and to make giving a part of your daily life in a way that giving $100 once doesn't. But if the question is, how many people are you supporting, right? I think $100 goes a lot further to help one person than $1 goes to help 100 people. So for me, it's a difference between the practice of giving versus the person who's receiving. But it's a great question.
I have a question.
Yeah, Gary.
How does somebody define somebody that's poor in biblical times? And today there are certain financial standards, but people have made a living out of panhandling, and it's becoming sometimes becomes a thing. How do you what's any rules of differentiation?
I think a person who's poor is a person who has no independent means of support and worries about where their meals are coming from.
Yes, I mean, that's true, but you as an individual can't identify another individual. Do you just assume by the fact that they're asking? Anybody with their hands out in any situation, you make that assumption that they're in need?
Not necessarily. They could be collecting for other people too, the way they do in Israel.
right, like we talked about before, right, we do expect the people who are in charge of our communal charity funds to do a little bit of question asking. When somebody comes to the synagogue and asks for money, which does happen, I have a couple questions I usually ask. And like from the, not that I'm not going to give something, I'm probably going to give something either way. But the amount that I give might be connected to, right, how the responses to those questions. And the questions are usually about what the need is. Have you been hungry recently? What are your weekly like expenses like in terms of paying for housing? Do you where are you living? Somebody came who was basically living in a van to the synagogue, right? I was moved to help that person who was living in a van, in part because they didn't have a place to live. That felt, now they could be lying to me, right? I didn't have a way of independently verifying that, but I asked a few questions and it seemed like they didn't have a place to live. So that's, right, the rabbis do have this question. What?
Asking questions is appropriate.
Yeah, I think in a respectful way, right? There are ways to do it that are also inappropriate. But I think it's okay to ask some questions.
I don't like this one.
All right, so here's this one. The Deuteronomy says you should give somebody de machzoro asher yechsar lo. You should give them enough to fulfill the needs that they lack. Okay? So what does that mean? If the person is hungry, feed him. If the person needs clothing, clothe him. If he was a formerly wealthy person whose custom was to ride on a horse with a servant to run in front of him, and then he became poor, you should purchase a horse and a slave for him. So each person according to what they need.
That's a little extreme.
Yeah.
That one's kind of weird.
Yeah, how's he going to
Very
maintain the horse and the slave?
I think it is a question of dignity, right? Deuteronomy says, "De machzoro asher yechsar lo," right? You have to give him what he lacks. If he was accustomed to living in luxury, right? Perhaps the community has a responsibility to support him in the manner to which he was accustomed to living. Now, we have in America this idea, beggars can't be choosers, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I find that sentiment to be deeply contrary to the Jewish teaching of human dignity. That, in fact, the thing that is most lacking for a person who is suffering from poverty is the ability to choose. And if we have the ability to provide that person with an opportunity for choice, I think that's very powerful. Choosing is what makes us free. Poverty is a condition of unfreedom because it's a condition that has no choices. I will also say this, right? We live in a society where wealthy people are able to choose to do things more cost efficiently than poor people, right? It is much more cost efficient, all right, to buy 36 toilet paper rolls than to buy 2 toilet paper rolls, right? But if you are poor and you're counting pennies to be able to make your rent, you're much more likely to buy 2 toilet paper rolls than to buy 36. And that adds up over time to hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? And that's just a very small example, but payday lending, even rent, as opposed to investing in a house in equity, right? Leasing a car as opposed to buying a car, right? There are all kinds of ways in which our society makes it easy for a person to make a economically bad choice in the long run because it's the economically good choice in the short run, right? Being able to provide somebody with the ability to choose to make the economically more sustainable choice can be a very powerful thing for human dignity.
What do you do about the large number of Haredim in Israel who don't work because they're studying?
Well, the state of Israel has decided that those folks, many of them, get supported by the taxpayers' dollars of the citizens of Israel.
But they're still sending emissaries out for tzedakah.
Yeah, I tend to not donate to those causes because oftentimes the emissaries that they're sending are supporting yeshiva institutions as opposed to supporting
families.
Families. And it's very hard in this country to tell the difference between the yeshiva institution schnorrers and the people who are actually asking for food for hungry people, families. So I tend to donate. I donate to Israel, to poor people in Israel. I tend to donate to the Leket Israel, the Leket Israel organization, which what they do is they buy the extra food from farmers, and they buy the leftover food from restaurants, and they repackage it and give it to people who need food. And so I know that money is going to feed hungry people, and Leket does a lot of work in the Haredi community. And I also make donations to Federation that does a lot of work in the Haredi community, even though they don't publicize that they do.
I learned an interesting fact in Israel last year when I was with my Haredi friends, that many of the yeshiva bachers are American citizens receiving American U.S. money to go to Israel, and that the money then that's collected in Israel to support the yeshivas isn't appropriate to be supporting Americans who were there. I was shocked when I heard this. Shocked.
Deborah.
Well, you kind of brought up
Gary.
You brought up the point indirectly about the question I had when you're dealing with dozens of panhandlers on the street, and it's your sense that they are schnorrers or they're professional panhandlers, and the decision on who to give and who not to give. You're making that decision in based on your observations and knowledge. And sometimes you have to make that snap decision when you're deciding if you're going to give a couple of bucks to somebody somewhere.
Oh.
Well, if a person comes and they say, I'm raising money for such and such a yeshiva, they're not lying about that. That's what they're raising money for. A person who's panhandling on the street is likely raising money for themselves.
Yes, I'm
right.
jaded and certainly.
Okay, I want to share this with you, how much to give. So does anyone know, by the way, what Jewish tradition says you should give?
Yes,
how much
the Torah
to
says 10%, but never more than 20.
Good. All right. So yes, that is the common answer. Give give 10% or 5% but not more than 20%. That's, by the way, of income. If you're wealthy, you should probably be giving more. Because your assets, yeah, you should be giving more. All right, so Rabbi Daniel Nevins, who is my teacher, and the dean of the rabbinical school at JTS,
Wow.
prepared this form. He calls it Form 199 Tzedakah spreadsheet. And the idea is it's like a tax form you fill out. So, so he says, okay, so first you put down your name and your Hebrew name, and that's just nice. Then we get to the tachlis here, all right? So tevel is the Mishnah's term for untithed produce, which is forbidden from personal use until the various tithes have been separated. So your money, that's untithed money, that is your gross adjusted income, that is, right, forbidden for personal use until you've made sure to be giving the right amount of your tithes, right? So then Rabbi Nevin says, okay, and go to your 1040 and write in your family's income, your household's income from your 1040. And then he points out that an alternative metric for those with great assets but modest income would be to assign a percentage of assets, say 1 to 2%, to be distributed on an annual basis as tevel. Thus, a retired person with $5 million in assets but negligible income would distribute $50,000 annually to tzedakah. Okay?
Rabbi, can you make this bigger at all?
Nope.
Okay. I just have to get really close to read it.
Yeah.
Can you send it out to us
I can definitely share it with you.
That would be good.
after?
Yes.
Yep.
Not,
So then he says, okay, then you enter the amount of your civil taxes that you paid, and he points out, it is understood that a portion of your civil taxes is dedicated to social welfare, such as food stamps, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. These government programs perform some of the function of tzedakah, but it is not sufficient for a Jewish household to claim civil taxes as fulfillment of tzedakah. On the other hand, there is precedent in Jewish sources for excluding the amount surrendered for civil taxes from the income taxable for Jewish causes, and then he gives a source for that. So anyway, he's trying to be very conscientious about how to figure out exactly what to give. Then then he suggests that you enter the total amount of what he calls peah, that's the corners of the fields, which he defines as emergency poverty relief funds and communal donations in your most recent civil tax year. So you discount the money you already gave to tzedakah, and then you enter the cost of your housing expenses. And so he says, right, classical Jewish law does not discuss rent or mortgage expenses, but in our context, it would be unrealistic to exclude such expenses. However, only a primary domicile can be included, not a vacation home. Moreover, this amount should include only direct expenses such as rent, mortgage, and utilities, not decoration, art, or other household expenses such as food, cleaning services, etc. Right? So the cost of your living, but not the extra stuff, right? And food doesn't count. All right, so then you subtract all of those, and that's your amount that you need to then tithe. Okay? So then what are your tithes? The classical sources talk about 2 tithes. The Maser Rishon, the first tithe, was to support the temple, and the second tithe was to support the poor. So how do we think about that in our modern period? The first tithe is the purpose of that is to support Jewish religious and educational institutions. So you multiply you take 10% of line 17, which is your tevel, right? You take 10% of that, and then you subtract. So he gives you a volunteer credit. he says, okay, you can subtract 10% of that line up to 30% for every 40 hours that you spend volunteering. So if you're on the board of your synagogue and you spend 40 hours a year on that, or 120 hours a year on that, you can count that as tzedakah because you are volunteering your time. Then you can enter the amount that you paid your congregation in the form of dues and donations. Then the amount that you paid to your that your family paid for Jewish educational and educational travel. That can include Jewish summer camps. All right, so families with children in Jewish day schools and summer camps will likely pay far more than this amount in tuition. Ideally, the amount here will cover the specifically Jewish content of the program, i.e. the difference in expense between this and a comparable private school or camp. I am blending a lot of the Maser Sheni concept of a pilgrimage fund into this first time. So he says, okay, figure out what it would cost to send your kid to the local private school, like prep school, and then what it costs to send your kid to a Jewish day school, and the difference, that's the Jewish content. So that's what you count towards here. All right. Then any donations that you make to institutions of Jewish learning. And all of those lines, you subtract them, and then that's the amount remaining for you to donate to Jewish religious organizations. Yeah, what?
Was this guy an accountant?
No, he's no. I mean,
he may have had the help of one.
I think he wanted it to feel like a tax form. Like he wanted it to have that same weight and seriousness, like that you should really be filling this out. Like you should take seriously all of the, I think your many Jewish households like probably end up like spending more than is required just on that stuff. Like you might end up with a negative balance on your, you may have given more than you needed to. Or you might find that you haven't given enough yet, and so then you can make another donation to your synagogue, right? I think there's something very powerful about this system, and he really thought about it also in terms of the sources. So then the Maser Sheni is the second tithe. He says, I have modified the classic proportions and purpose of Maser Sheni. According to the Mishnah, years 1, 2, 4, and 5 of the 7-year cycle were used for the pilgrimage to go to Jerusalem. Years 3 and 6 were used to support the local poor, and year 7 was a sabbatical in which all crops were declared public, which is also poverty relief. So poverty relief therefore accounts for 10% of 2 out of the 7 years, whereas 100% is 100% of the 7th year, whereas pilgrimage accounts for 10% of each of the 4 of the 7 years. So in fact, this second tithe is really 9% of Tevel, because since the first tithe has already been removed, though some rabbinic sources call for the second tithe to be adjusted up to match the first tithe level. It seems more appropriate in our context for Maser Sheni to become entirely focused on poverty relief. The pilgrimage fund concept can be rolled into our idea of the first tithe, which allows for personal expenses for educational purposes. Thus, the second tithe becomes entirely Maser Ani, entirely the poor tithe, which I think makes sense in our modern context also. Like in the ancient Israel, maybe they could support the poor only in the 3rd year, the 6th year, and the 7th year, but we need to support the poor every year. So anyway, then you go back to your Tevel and you take an additional 10% of that, or 9%, and then half of it, he says, should go to poverty relief efforts in the Jewish community, both local and international, and that's specifically poverty relief efforts, as opposed to Jewish communal institutional support. And then The other half, 50%, should go to poverty relief for the general population, both local and international. And then you itemize your disbursements and you insert the sum of all those disbursements there. Classical discussions of tzedakah indicate that relatively larger gifts should be made locally. Nevertheless, we're all responsible for each other, so you should also donate to Jews in Israel, for example. And also we're responsible for the whole world, so you should also, pay for poverty relief in Kenya and India, etc. Then you subtract line 29, you subtract all of your total payments to your Maser Sheni, and then any remaining funds are what you still owe in poverty relief. So then at that you can make a donation. He suggests doing this, by the way, on 9 Tishrei, meaning like every year you should make sure that before Yom Kippur you have fulfilled your obligation of tithing your previous year, so that you go into the new year fully paid for. And then he says everything else is the amount available for additional personal expenses, additional personal stuff for the year. Do we do this in my household? Well, we haven't yet, but that doesn't mean we wouldn't. I think it's a very clever and serious approach. And I'm happy to share it with you. Mishka.
A couple of years ago, I did a Rosh Chodesh program, and I know Kathy was there because it was at Kathy's house.
She was out there.
She was there, and a gracious hostess, as always. We talked a lot about Maimonides, but I also created a chart. This is a very poor rendition, as we were talking about it, and I've added some things to it, but a way to decide or to see where you have given and what is of interest to you. I don't know how well you could read it. I was using a Sharpie. It's messy.
Yeah.
But
I think you showed it to me last year.
I did. Okay, well, I've added to it just now because we were talking about family coming first. Then things local, then things in the country, then things in Israel, could go anywhere you wanted to, and then in the world. But looking at these different categories, which again, I can't,
Yeah, I think it's very helpful, right?
It was really helpful to look at what you do and how you think about what's important. And like I was just thinking, which again, it never occurred to me, but things like sending a kid to camp is a family thing. Giving, because as an artist, giving money to family who could then put out an exhibit or do a piece of work. So I just found when I did this really, really helpful, and I can make it so it looks better and provide it to folk. Thank you for shaking your head, Kathy, that was a good thing.
It was a really helpful workshop. In fact, I kind of accumulated, I give during the year to different organizations, but then around this time of year, I have my stacks, and thanks to a lot of Mishka's teachings, I mean, there are so many requests for money.
Suggestions.
And I like to go over around November into December of, okay, what am I able to give this year and what are my priorities? And I mean, it breaks my heart because I love, love, love animals, but I don't give, I have to admit, I don't give to the ASPCA. I give locally to the Scotia Glenville Animal Shelter. So Mishka had a number of worksheets that were very helpful in helping us. How do you sort out and where do you prioritize?
Yeah, I mean, look, Rachel and I have decided to do it at the end of every month. We used to do it in November, December, and then in November and December, we're also buying, Hanukkah presents for all our family and birthday presents for our daughter, and right, like all of this. Like it felt like there was a lot of expenses all at once, and it felt like maybe we weren't giving as much as we would have otherwise. So we now, at the end of every single month, Rachel tallies up our expenses and our income and says, okay, we have X dollars left, and then we decide how much of that feels like the right amount to give to tzedakah, and then we sit down and we look at what we gave the last month, and we try to give something sort of that balances out that. So like basically we're doing 1 month where we give to local stuff, like local Jewish organizations and national food, food organizations. And then the next month we give like to national Jewish organizations and local food organizations. Like basically we're sort of, we look at what we did the last month and try to balance that. So, that's that. So we've been doing that successfully for the last 3 months. I admit that this is, because a lot of what we would be spending on is paying back my student loans, of which I have $100,000 of debt, but they're on hold right now because of the COVID relief. So we haven't been paying those back, and even though we probably should be, we haven't been. And so we these last couple months we actually had a little bit more to give to tzedakah than we have in the past, but really that's a deferred expense, because it's not like those loans are canceled. Although who knows? Maybe they will be.
Yeah. Hope, or at least in part. Two things that I've learned from some of the people, like Deb Friedson has told me, try to give locally to the local chapters of the national organizations because the money gets used better. It's not used so much for
overhead.
For overhead costs. And one thing to do also is to go to Charity Navigator to see how money is used.
It's different in different organizations. I definitely think that there are organizations which are better and organizations which are worse, and I'm happy to help point you to the ones which I think are worth your investment.
Could you
all right.
I'm sorry.
Marcia?
Can you let us know what they are?
I would be happy to.
You have to be a little careful with the Charity Navigators because they talk about percentages. So in a year when I receive $1 million endowment gift, and that has happened in our local federation, our costs to the amount of money we've raised go down substantially as a percentage of what we have. On a year when I don't get $1 million endowment gift, it looks like we're spending a whole lot more money to raise the money. So you have to be careful because you don't really know what's going on behind the scenes.
Okay, that's really good to know. My thinking, because I know from other people in other organizations, is as much as possible, talk to them directly, get that kind of information directly. But Charity Navigator is really good on a number of things. Yeah, I mean, there's also research that's been done and continues to be done. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, for example, is very invested in figuring out strategies of giving and what works. And so, so there, I'm not saying give to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation at all. I'm saying they have been using their money to test run certain ideas about how to do giving and how giving, like on an international level, and how to make the biggest impact. And like following those kinds of stories also might help inform how you give. All right, so I want to close with some discussion of the tzedakah things which are not just about money. So tzedakah is for the poor, but gemilut chasadim, acts of loving kindness, can be given to anyone. Tzedakah can only be given to the living, but gemilut chasadim can be
bestowed on the living and the dead. Tzedakah can be only offered with money, but Gemilut Chasadim can be offered through money or assistance. And so here are some ways that the Jewish community has gone into this idea of not just tzedakah, but gemilut chasadim or gemach funds. This is very common in Israel and among the Orthodox Jewish community, and less common in our circles. But in Israel, if you are a bride and you can't afford a dress, you can go to the Gemilut Chasadim fund, and there are a lot of extra dresses that you can wear once and then return, and that kind of thing. Then the Hebrew Free Loan Society is a wonderful example of that that does work in our own area along the lines of this. This, by the way, is one of the organizations I think definitely deserves your support. It doesn't have very much
never
overhead.
Advertised.
What?
It's never advertised locally.
The Hebrew Free Loan Society?
Yeah, they're not advertised locally.
Well, when I said locally, what I meant was the broader local sense of the state of New York. They do a lot of work downstate. But their work is really, really good. And they do work all over the country, even though they raise money, even though they're called of New York. And they've especially done some really fantastic COVID relief stuff. So the Hebrew Free Loan Society, worth a look.
They gave my son Michael a loan so that he could do one of his graduate work projects. And he doesn't even remember applying for it. And that was 10 years ago.
So there are some different ways of thinking about giving to tzedakah. And we've already talked about this. We've talked a lot about kavod, about honor, respect, dignity, human dignity. And we've also talked about the way in which each person represents the image of God. And so, right, by lifting up people, you're also expanding uplifting, upholding the image of God in the world. So that's a framing of thinking about tzedakah. And then another way to think about it is in thinking about the difference between tzedakah and charity, right? Tzedakah is an obligation or a commandment to give righteously, right? We went through that whole thing with Rabbi Nevins's spreadsheet, and I think one of the reasons why it sort of feels that sort of felt like an accounting or an accountant might have done it is because it is an accounting of an obligation, a commandment. Whereas when we often say the word charity, we think about charity, that what we mean by that is a voluntary action, a donation to help those in need that you choose to do. And that is, right, that those two things feel different. It's from the point of view of the giver, right? Of course you want to feel like you're giving out of the goodness of your heart, as opposed to giving because you feel obligated to give, right? But from the point of view of society or the poor people, which would they rather have? $10 every week from somebody who feels obligated to give, or every once in a while $100 from somebody who just felt moved, right? No, you want the $10 every week that you know it's coming so that you can plan to feed your family with that money, you know, right? Like the justice the association with justice is a very important part of what we do when we think about tzedakah. It's not just charity. And in fact, right, like I think that some of the donations that we give charitably, like for example, to the local the local SPCA, right, doesn't actually qualify toward your tzedakah obligation, right? It's wonderful, it's good, right? Your donation to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, right? Or to the National Public Radio, right? Those are great donations, right? I think that we should be supporting the arts and the news and you know, and the institutions of the public, right? But do I think that they qualify to fulfill your obligation of giving 10% of your income toward feeding the hungry or supporting communal Jewish institutions? No, I don't. I think those are extra giving. That is charity. Okay, then it gets more complicated when you start talking about medical expenses, for example, or when you start talking about supporting work to save the environment, or when you start right? Because a lot of this stuff overlaps, right? Or okay, what about buying malaria nets for people in Africa, right? I'm made to understand that an $100 gift toward malaria nets it improves the quality of life of more people. You know, you can improve the quality of life of, I don't know, something like 500 people with that $100 donation. Whereas in a $100 donation to our local food pantry, right, might feed one family for 2 weeks, okay, right? Feeding one family for 2 weeks is wonderful, but it substantially improving the quality of life of 500 people with these nets, right? Isn't that right? And so I think it's complicated. I think we live in a world where it isn't obvious, right? But I do think that, right, there are some things where it's more clear, like how public radio is an important social good, but probably not counting towards your tzedakah fund. All right.
Ellen Shartuk will be very angry with you.
But he calls it
But that's
charity.
okay.
Well, I didn't say you shouldn't donate to that.
I won't tell him. That's okay.
All right.
Think of Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. That maybe that's helpful, thinking in terms of first you have to make sure people's basic needs of food and shelter and clothing are met. And that beyond that, if you can give beyond that, then help, you know, that their enjoyment of music and the arts or whatever. But it's like you say, Rabbi, it's very complicated.
It is.
Well, there's a difference between tzedakah and charity.
Right. That's how I would think about it. Like, you have a certain obligation in Judaism to give a certain amount of tzedakah. Beyond that, you can give to whatever causes that you feel are important to give. And here, so I wanted to close with this, you know, different ways of conceiving of it. So here's another way to think about it. A person shouldn't ask, how can I spare my money to give to poor people? Because you should know that the money is not yours, but it is rather a deposit with which to do the will of the depositor, which is God, and you gotta distribute some of it to the poor. In other words, right, I think that's also part of Rabbi Nevins's point with this spreadsheet, is that actually it's a mathematical equation. You have, right, some of your money that's sitting in your bank account is not yours. And until you have given the right amount of money until you have done your tithes, you can't just use that money, right? That is to say, right, until you've tithed your produce, you can't eat your produce. And so there's a certain amount of money which is sitting in your bank account, which actually belongs to the poor, and you've got to figure out how much that is and disperse it correctly. And then and if you think about it as your money which you're giving, maybe that's not the right way to think about it.
I like that.
All right. With our last couple of moments, I just wanted to go back to the idea that you're the director of a homeless shelter, and you're talking to these kids. Or you're trying to put a quote up on the wall or you're thinking about how aside from food can you support the people who come into your door. Has any of your answers changed? Has your thinking changed based on the texts and discussions that we've had over the last hour?
Can you repost them?
Still number one.
So my thinking is the same as it was in the beginning, because I feel that I have made some good decisions for tzedakah and charity.
I think it's still number one.
I agree.
Well, I like the spreadsheet idea. I would really like to have a copy of that. I think that's a very useful worksheet. And also, I think it's important and encouraging to think of the time that we donate and our volunteer time as counting, not just the funds that we send out.
But
at least up to a certain amount.
Yeah.
At what rate does volunteer time count? If it's
He
10 hours,
counted it as up to 120 hours.
But
You could count 40 hours. 40 hours as 10% of your giving. So it's a variable rate based on each person's total amount. That is to say, if you make $150,000 a year, your volunteer time or whatever is worth more than if you, which I think that that is to say, in actual dollars, your volunteer time is worth more, but in the percentage, it's not. That is to say, 10% of 150,000 is more than 10% of 20,000 or whatever. Yeah, except it wouldn't be 10% of 150,000. It would be 10% of however much your tzedakah donation would be.
It used to be that you could actually use the amount of time and the gas money you spent getting to and from some volunteer work that you did. I don't know that that's still the same, but that was for a long time.
Write it off your income tax.
Precisely.
So Rabbi, in response to this question and getting back to what has anything shifted in terms of what I would tell the school children? Of course, I still go back to deferring to exactly what Deborah said. However, I would also add in an element of educating a little bit about donations and some of the information and the decision-making process that you talked about. Granted, bringing it down to the level of kids. but also getting more into more about when you do this, what it does for others, like explaining. So I would just use what you've said. Nothing has shifted from my initial thoughts, but I would just incorporate more knowledge dissemination.
Yeah. The American Jewish World Service, AJWS, has a truly fabulous Tzedakah curriculum for middle schoolers, which I am also happy to link to. I have to ask Rabbi Nevins about sharing his thing. I'm sure he has no problem with it since he shared it widely. He has shared it widely. I will check with him before I share it with y'all. But the AJWS curriculum is public and can be linked to without asking. And it is a great curriculum for kids and adults.
If anybody wants to, I'll remake this so that it can be read.
That would be great.
And fix it up some, because there really a whole lot new stuff in my brain about doing this. Can we get the entire presentation you've done?
This slideshow?
Yeah.
Yeah, that will be linked on the website.
But so that we can actually download it?
Yeah, you can download all of the things that are linked on the website are able to be downloaded.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
I haven't checked, so I'm not sure if last week's is up there yet. But the first week and the sheet from the first week is up there of this program, and you can download the sheet from the first week. It's there.
Yeah, I printed it out, so
yeah,
somewhere on my desk.
But yes, I can try to put this up there.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was really good.
Wonderful.
I want to close by saying, if you liked this Back to the Basics theme, let me know, or let the Adult Education Committee know, because the plan is to have a lot of sort of Back to the Basics themed programs over the course of this year. The next one is this coming Shabbat morning. Will be a learner's minyan from learner service from 8:45 to 9:45, which is in person or by live stream. And the last one I taught about Psalm 30, which is the psalm right before Psukkah Zimra. And this time I'm going to talk about teach about something else. But the sort of format of that is sort of a deep dive into some prayer as a way of exploring why we say what we say and how it connects to the broader to our broader service. And so that would be from 8:45 to 9:45 this coming Shabbat. And the next thing after that will be 2 Thursdays from now, not next week, which is Thanksgiving, Chag Sameach, but the following Thursday, December 3rd, will be the first of a 6-session, 3 in December, 3 in January, course on an introduction to Jewish history. And that will be taught by my father, Jeff Spitzer, and the Adult Education Committee was thinking that while I'm on family leave with my hopefully healthy newborn child, that will be sometime in mid-December, we can find somebody else who is an expert in Jewish history to give us some of the basics of Jewish history while I'm gone. My father is done his doctoral work in Jewish history and is a teacher who has taught rabbinics and rabbinic literature and history, Jewish history, to audiences of all ages for the last several decades. And he's very excited to come teach. And the sort of theme of the course is Jewish history through Jewish texts, through the Jewish textual tradition. So I don't think there's going to be a lot of text study in it, though there might be a little bit. But I think the idea is like, how did the Talmud come to be? How did the codes come to be? What are the Talmud? What is the codes? How did this connect? How does this connect to Jewish history? How have Jews related to Jewish texts throughout history and into the modern period? And that will be 6 sessions, the first 3 Thursdays in December and the first 3 Thursdays of January. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Shalom, Yashikoach.
Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi. Really good.
Thank you,
job.
Rabbi.
Lila Tov.
Lila
Rabbi,
Tov.
can we talk tomorrow?